Part 24. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 231. At Marine Headquarters Marineford, Admiral Zephyr is currently in the officer training camp, talking to a group of Navy elites. Suddenly, a naval colonel ran over in a hurry. "General Zephyr, emergency," the naval colonel said quickly. Zephyr was stunned for a moment, and then asked, "What's the emergency?" "Crocodile and Whitebeard got into a fight." "No, it was Impelton, and Impelton was attacked by pirates," the naval colonel said quickly. Zephyr was a little confused at this time. "Imperial, I've never been attacked before." "Who is it?" General Zephyr asked in a deep voice. "It has been confirmed that it is the Warhammer pirates. Khazgaroz Orgrim has appeared in Imperialon, and most of their cotters are there," the naval colonel quickly responded. "Shiki," Zephyr's expression changed. "There is no doubt that Khazgaroz Orgrim will appear in Impelton, and he will definitely not go shopping. The only reason for him to appear there is to save Shiji. Got it?" "Damn, how did they get there?" Zephyr cursed at first, but did not delve into these issues any further. Now is not the time. The top priority is to quickly support Impelton. On Impelton's side, there is Magellan, and that guy's strength is indeed strong enough, not inferior to Sakaski and others. Orgrim, this is not a pirate that can be easily dealt with. Based on what the Navy headquarters knew about Orgrim, how could he dare to attack Imperialton if he wasn't sure? "Prepare the ship, hurry up, I want to go to Impelton in person," General Zephyr said quickly. After receiving Zephyr's order, the naval colonel left quickly. At the same time, Zephyr said to another Navy man next to him, "Is Porisalino at the headquarters?" "Yes," the Navy responded. "Call him and ask him to go to Impelton with me," Zephyr said without hesitation. Although among his disciples, Porisalino did not have a very good relationship with him, we have to admit that Porisalino is very strong. Now Sakaski and Kuzan followed the Warring States period to the New World. Jun and the others didn't seem to be in Marineford, and Zephyr didn't care about that much anymore. Polusalino was just Polusalino. Soon, Zephyr's the warship left Marineford and headed towards Impelton. At the same time, Orgrim and Magellan also had a fierce battle at the port of Impelton. I have to say, Magellan is a genius. In the hands of Caribou, the swamp fruit is just rubbish and a shame to the natural system. But in the hands of Magellan, it is very powerful. Orgrim's warhammer hits Magellan every time. Absorbed in, this does seem to be elementalization. After all, Magellan transformed his body into mud. But this kind of elementalization is not like the general natural system, which is just to avoid physical attacks. On the contrary, this kind of elementalization, devouring the power of the attack. If I have to say it, Magellan's defense is very powerful. After several hammer blows, Magellan caught Orgrim's attack head-on. However, after these tentative exchanges, Orgrim Reem seemed to have discovered something, and an evil smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Gee ha 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 ha, I see, I have found your weakness," Orgrim laughed. Magellan's face didn't look good, and he seemed to realize something. In Orgrim's original impression, the weakness of the swamp fruit was the closed environment. For example, that guy Caribou was locked in a wine barrel and couldn't get out. But now, he seems to have discovered a new weakness, that is, high temperature. The high temperature brought by Orgrim's warhammer can quickly burn dry Magellan's mud and turn it into clods. After turning into a clod, Magellan became less arrogant. Before, it might have taken a lot of effort to capture you, but now, I can only say that you are unlucky, Magellan. Orgrim laughed loudly. As soon as he finished speaking, the warhammer in his hand turned red, and the high temperature scorched and distorted the surrounding air. The mud under Orgrim's feet also it quickly dried up and cracked into clods, and Magellan's expression became even gloomier. Hot breath the roar of the Dragon King, Orgrim roared angrily, and the war hammer in his hand brought out a hot shock wave, and he struck it out. The high temperature distorted the air, and a steady stream of heat radiated from the shock wave, evaporating all the swamps on the ground wherever it passed. Turned into cracked clods of soil. Magellan let out a low shout, blocked it with his arms in front of his chest, and a large amount of mud exploded, but the moment it came into contact with the shock wave, the originally wet mud began to dry up. Then it broke into countless oil powders, it fell to the ground. Before this wave of impact fell, Orgrim's strong figure had already rushed in front of Magellan, raised his hand and hammered, and smashed it out again. It was different from the high temperatures in the previous fights. Well, before, although the warhammer in Orgrim's hand was scorching hot, it could at most boil the swamp, but this time, the high temperature directly solidified Magellan. When the hammer fell, Magellan's arms were directly shattered. Turned into dirt, his huge figure was also thrown away and hit the gate of Imperial. Invincible ability? Gee ha 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 ha, I have to admit that this ability is very strong in your hands, but how can there be any invincible ability in this world? Orgrim laughed loudly and said. Swamp Fury, Magellan's arms condensed again, and he pressed them on the ground. Then, a large amount of mud emerged again, directly forming a tsunami, and swept towards Orgrim. Moon steps, Orgrim chuckled softly. With both feet exerting force, the figure flew directly into the air, over the mud tsunami, and then, with the warhammer in his hand dancing, it headed straight for Magellan. Magellan was also furious at this time, roared, and a large amount of mud began to condense from his body. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a mud giant, raised his hand and punched Orgrim in the air. The warhammer collided with the mud fist, and then the scorching heat continued to erupt. Magellan's fist began to turn white. Then the water vapor in the swamp was evaporated completely, and the mud fist turned into a mud fist. Then, a violent shock wave exploded, shattering Magellan's huge fist into dust all over the sky. Since Orgrim obtained the heat fruit and fed it to Warhammer, he made a total of 1 attack in Rogtown. And that time, it seemed very hasty. Many people didn't notice anything unusual and just thought he had developed some new moves. Magellan had not taken Orgrim seriously before, because he believed that his own ability could not defeat a reckless man like Orgrim. Orgrim's powerful power can be swallowed by the swamp, and its powerful shockwave can also swallow up everything. So in theory, Magellan thought he could suppress Orgrim, but he never expected that Orgrim could generate heat. In the first few fights, the heat emanating from them was nothing, and it would not affect my ability. But when Orgrim got serious, the high temperature, you can evaporate all the water in your own mud in an instant and turn the mud into mud. Isn't this cheating? The ability that was supposed to restrain Orgrim suddenly became a restrained ability in the blink of an eye. With one hammer, Magellan was knocked out again. Dust was flying all over the sky. Orgrim smiled. With the high temperature in his hand, it seemed that he didn't need any weapons or domineering power to defeat Magellan, just like a rubber fruit beating Annie. It was like hitting crocodile with a wet fist. You can hit the entity directly, so what kind of armament and domineering do you need? Magellan, who was originally very aggressive, was chased and beaten by Orgrim in the blink of an eye. Mud, Magellan shouted in a low voice. Before he could finish his words, Orgrim hit him with a hammer, sending him flying directly. The dirt flew, and Magellan hit the solid wall of Imperial, and a mouthful of blood escaped from the corner of his mouth. Blood stains. If he hadn't blocked it with his domineering strength just now, he might have been injured more seriously. Regardless of whether he can restrain himself or not, Magellan is no match for Orgrim in terms of overall strength. Now that Orgrim has restrained him, Magellan is immediately defeated. Just when Orgrim was about to pursue him, his heart suddenly tightened, as if he had a bad premonition. Many strong people have this kind of premonition, and Orgrim was not careless. He stepped on it, and his figure was directly it disappeared on the spot, and the next second, a golden light cut through the sea and exploded directly on the port of Imperial. Although the target was not where Orgrim was just now, the violent explosion swallowed up that piece in an instant. The fire flickered for a while, then quickly dissipated, and a deep crater appeared in the port. Orgrim stood in the distance, holding a war hammer in his hand and frowning slightly. Then, I saw a figure wearing a navy cloak of justice walking out of the smoke of the explosion. This figure was wearing a yellow striped suit and looked very vulgar, but there was a powerful aura coming from him. Porisalano, Orgrim whispered softly. Yes, the person who arrived unexpectedly was none other than Porisalano. At the second gate of justice, Porisalano accurately calculated the location of Imperialton, and directly shot a golden light across the sea. This move was very risky. If there was a slight mistake, Porisalano would have committed suicide by jumping into the sea. But General Sci-fi was pressing hard, and Impelton was also crucial. Porisalano still had some confidence in his ability, so he took the risk. At least now, the result is good. He arrived half an hour earlier than General Sci-fi. Oh, how scary, Hosgarot Orgrim. Porisalano looked at Orgrim and spoke softly. Orgrim said with an evil smile on his lips, really. He had never fought against Porisalano before, and this could be regarded as the first time he saw Porisalano. But the momentum given to him by Porisalano was very strong, much stronger than that guy Sakaski on the Chambord Islands. Of course, after such a long time, Sakaski should be stronger, right? Although Orgrim is very confident in his own strength, he believes that Porisalano is an opponent worthy of taking seriously. Perhaps he has reached the threshold of the general's strength. At least in the daytime, he should not be inferior to himself. Especially his ability is not weaker than the invincible power of the Thunder Fruit. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 232. Orgrim did not underestimate Porisalano. Porisalano also did not dare to underestimate Orgrim. Among the new generation of senior generals in the Navy, Porisalano's strength was among the best. It can even be said that he can vaguely beat Sakaski and compete with the original Darag. It's just that Porisalano's character is more oily. He doesn't have the aura of Darag, who can defeat thousands of people, nor is he as stubborn as Sakaski, who is dedicated to absolute justice. To be honest, Porisalano is very smooth and clearly has the strength to overwhelm the others, but this guy doesn't like to be in the limelight. Even though he is now a lieutenant general, and may even be promoted to general candidate at any time, he still clocks in at work every day, drinks tea, and handles some documents. When the off-duty time comes, he doesn't stop at all and goes straight to get off work. Guys like Sakaski are on the same level as Porisalano, but Sakaski is very diligent and goes wherever there is trouble. There is no need for anyone to urge you, and Porisalano is the kind of person who orders you after coming down. I will drink tea at the headquarters. I won't go anywhere and won't meddle in other people's business. This time, if General Sci-fi hadn't ordered him to be brought along, Porisalano probably wouldn't have come. At this moment, Porisalano felt a little heavy in his heart when facing Orgrim. Orgrim's reputation is too great. Sakaski, Kuzan, Jun, and even Darag have all suffered losses at his hands. The battle in Rogtown made him famous all over the world. Looking at Magellan in the distance, although he was not seriously injured, he hurriedly took his time. How long had it been since he came from the Navy headquarters? Just a little over an hour. As the deputy director of Imperial, Magellan is also very powerful. If he is placed at the Navy headquarters, he will be a talent that is not inferior to him. But in just over an hour, he was already suppressed by Orgrim. Can Porisalano stop thinking too much? Orgrim, you are in the new world, Porisalano spoke softly. However, before he finished speaking, Orgrim had no intention of listening to him. With a sudden stamp of his feet, A shock wave erupted, and Orgrim's figure rushed towards Porisalino at an extremely fast speed. Under Porisalino's orange sunglasses, his pupils shrank slightly because Orgrim's speed was too fast. But he, Porisalino, is also known for his speed. Orgrim swung the hammer suddenly, and Porisalino's figure turned into golden light. In an instant, he disappeared with the weapon-colored domineering force on the side of the hammer. At the same moment, as soon as the golden light scattered, a strong wind came to Orgrim's ears. Porisalino's body has not yet condensed, but a leg has appeared out of thin air and kicked towards Orgrim. So fast, Orgrim thought so in his heart, and at the same time, he suddenly raised his arm and blocked it on the side of his head. The next moment, Porisalino's figure solidified instantly, and he kicked Orgrim's arm. Speed is power, and the most outstanding thing about Porisalino's shining fruit is speed. The strong arm was hit by Porisalino's kick. Orgrim's shoulder slid toward his head, and his elbow touched his ear. At the same time, a fierce force came. He scraped his feet on the ground and plowed the ground into a ravine more than 1 meter long, which was able to withstand the power of Porisalino's kick. At the same time, Orgrim's arm suddenly exerted force, directly deflecting Porisalino's kick. Then he exerted force with his waist, and the warhammer grasped in his other hand swung a semicircle in the air, blasted directly towards Porisalino. Porisalino was also dissatisfied with his movements. Although he was known for his speed, due to his fruit ability, he was also very confident in his own strength, especially the power of kicks. Seeing Orgrim's hammer come over, Porisalino exerted his strength in the air, and his figure spun half a circle. He looked slender, but he kicked very powerfully. He faced the hammer with one kick. "Have you ever experienced a kick at the speed of light?" Porisalino whispered softly. The moment he finished speaking, his kick collided with Orgrim's warhammer. First, there was an armed and domineering confrontation, but it only lasted for a short moment. Then, a dazzling golden light scattered out, and then, a strong explosion exploded directly from the warhammer. But that's it, the muscles on Orgrim's arms surged, and there was no stalemate at all. A powerful shockwave erupted from the warhammer. Porisalino's figure was instantly covered. At the same time, Orgrim's warhammer also swirled a round ball. With one blow, Porisalino's figure in the air exploded into a golden light and flew out, directly hitting the wall of Imperialton, causing the place to collapse. Orgrim moved his arm holding the warhammer a little, feeling a little sore. Although he directly knocked Porisalino away in this blow, Porisalino's kick was indeed very powerful. Orgrim was able to withstand it, and his strong arms were a little weak. Sour. Before Orgrim could clearly see the situation over there, a golden light burst out from the smoke and dust of the ruins, so fast that Orgrim couldn't even dodge. He suddenly pulled up the warhammer, and the armed domineering energy covered it, and he hit it very accurately in front of the golden light. Then, a strong explosion erupted from the warhammer, causing Orgrim to close his eyes slightly, and the navy uniform on his body it exploded directly. Orgrim's muscular upper body and strong muscles were revealed, faintly glowing under the sunlight. As soon as Orgrim put down the warhammer in his hand, he saw several more laser beams coming from the ruins. As soon as he stepped on it, his steps exploded and he disappeared from the spot. Sure enough, the next moment, his position was hit by a laser, causing a cloud of smoke and dust to explode. With his feet in the air and before he landed on the ground, Magellan seized the opportunity. A stream of mud spurted out from his hands, like slime, and hit Orgrim, as if to trap him. A fierce look flashed in Orgrim's eyes, and he swung out the warhammer in his hand. The shock wave exploded, blasting the mud from the air. But at the same time, Orgrim seemed to realize his mistake. Sure enough, another laser beam from Porisalino had arrived in front of Orgrim. The strong explosion directly covered Orgrim, and the black smoke from the explosion also enveloped his surroundings. Porisalano's figure emerged from the ruins at this moment. His brows were furrowed, and he did not appear happy because he had hit Orgrim, because he knew very well that Orgrim would not, he could die casually. Shine, Porisalano murmured softly, raised a finger, and the fingertips exuded golden light, and the light was gathering. Before he finished speaking, a hot breath came from the smoke of the explosion. Porisalano's expression changed, as if he felt some great threat. Zholang Dragon King Sai. Orgrim's voice came out from the smoke of the explosion, and the next moment, a red beam of light burst out from the smoke. Porisalano had no intention of resisting at all, and cold sweat started to flow from his forehead. Without saying a word, his figure turned into golden light and disappeared from the spot. The crimson beam of light instantly hit Imperialon's city wall. It did not cause any explosion or collapse. Instead, it penetrated directly and drilled a small hole in the thick city wall. There was a burning atmosphere all around the small hole, and the thick stone wall actually faintly flowed red slurry, just like Sakaski's magma. It was too late, but it was too soon. The beam of light sank into the city wall. In a breath at most, Porisalano's figure had just appeared in the port, and a violent vibration was transmitted to his feet. Then, Porisalano saw the huge castle of Impelton, which exploded directly from the inside. Like fireworks, countless rubbles shot out. At the same time, a lot of hot air boiled out from inside, and some of the building stones were actually melted into fire slurry by the high temperature. With just one blow, Orgrim completely destroyed the deep-sea prison, the Impel City, and the sea castle of Impelton. Fortunately, Impelton was built from the top down, otherwise this blow might have destroyed Impelton directly. Magellan was not as fast as Porisalano, and he was directly covered by the aftermath of this attack. The high heat airflow directly steamed his abilities, and he was unable to do so. The elementalization was successful and he was buried directly in the falling ruins. Among the ruins, flames began to burn, creating a hell-like appearance. Orgrim's figure, with this hell as the background, appeared in Porisalano's sight again. He was hit by Porisalano's laser, but it seemed to be nothing serious. Only a small hole was opened in the muscles of his chest, and blood was flowing. But Porisalano also saw it, and the blood quickly stopped, and even Orgrim's wound began to heal. Is immortality real? A look of surprise flashed in Porisalano's eyes. Orgrim reached out and patted the dust on his shoulders. With a ferocious smile on his lips, he looked at Porisalano and said, "You are very fast. Hurry up, Porisalano." Porisalano said softly, "The hammer of destruction, well-deserved reputation." As soon as he finished speaking, Orgrim's eyes lit up, and he said with a somewhat happy expression, "Gee ha 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 ha, do you know that I prefer the name Doomhammer? Well, you are also a discerning person. Just because of this, your life is saved today. Orgrim has had enough of his messy reputation. What an evil skull crusher, what an enemy of mankind. It's really terrible." At this time, Porisalano mentioned the words Doomhammer, which made Orgrim feel a lot happier. Porisalano was stunned for a moment. According to the Navy's intelligence, Orgrim's warhammer seemed to be called Doomhammer, right? I just mentioned it? It's just your mouth. Do you, Orgrim, need to be so happy? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 233. Before Porisalano could speak, he saw a transparent light wave condensed in Orgrim's hand. This light wave contained powerful impact power. Then, just when Porisalano thought Orgrim would hit the shock wave towards him. However, Orgrim suddenly squeezed his fist and flattened the energy ball, which collapsed into a small square in his hand. Then, Porisalano looked at Orgrim and swallowed the small cube condensed by the impact energy in one gulp, as if he had eaten a sugar cube. In the next moment, Orgrim's body seemed to swell slightly, but it quickly returned to normal. But Orgrim's bronze skin began to turn faintly red at this time, and the surging blood continued to stir up in his body. It was even faintly possible to see that the subtle impact force was surging in his body, flowing in blood vessels. Porosalino's eyes were startled, as if he had thought of something. However, before he could come to a conclusion, Orgrim had already dropped his warhammer on the ground. His figure was like lightning, pulling out several after-images on the ground and rushing towards Porosalino. The speed was so fast that even Porosalino almost didn't react. In just an instant, Orgrim was in front of Porosalino, thrust his elbow forward, and struck Porosalino in the chest. "Not good," Porosalino was shocked and said. He was extremely fast. He clasped his hands in front of his chest and pulled out again, directly pulling out a solid golden light. This golden light seemed to look like a sword. "Tiankongyun sword," Porosalino shouted in a low voice. At the same time, the Tiankongyun sword, which was originally shining with golden light, instantly turned black and was covered with powerful armed domineering energy. This sword appeared at the right time, just right on Porosalino's chest. When it was covered with armed domineering, Orgrim also elbowed the Tiankongyun sword. "Tyrannosaurus charging elbow," Orgrim shouted in a low voice. Then, a powerful shockwave erupted directly, and then the Tiankongyun sword transformed by golden light was broken from the middle by this powerful force. Porosalino's armed domineering force it was also washed away directly. The next second, Porosalino's figure was seen, being blown away directly, rolling several times in the air, and the sea was at his feet. At this time, Porosalino's mouth overflowed. There was blood on his face, and his chest was slightly collapsed. It looked as if several ribs were broken. Just as he was about to fall into the sea and die, Porosalino quickly condensed a ray of light in his hand and moved towards Impel. "Shot out of the ruins of Dayton." "Yada mirror," Porosalino chuckled. Then, just when he was about to fall into the sea, he turned into a golden light and appeared on the ruins of Imperial. As soon as his feet were firmly planted, Porosalino suddenly raised his arm and blocked it on the side of his head. Sure enough, just like he had just kicked Orgrim, Orgrim's figure had already appeared here, exuding blood, and he also raised his leg and kicked Porosalino's head. The powerful kick force directly pressed Porosalino's arm and hit the side of his head, causing ripples in the muscles of his cheek. Unable to withstand the force of this kick, Porosalino was directly kicked out again by Orgrim. This time, Porosalino was not too embarrassed. While rolling in the ruins, he raised his hand and fired 2 lasers. "Compared with Sci-fi, you are not good at learning," Orgrim laughed loudly. He wrapped his arms with a domineering look, raised his hand and waved it casually, and directly knocked away Porosalino's laser. "Let your teacher Sci-fi teach you a few words. Ability is just an increase. Only your own strength is the real strength," Orgrim said as he raised his arms in front of his chest, like a boxer on the ring. The strong muscles on his body, under the sunlight, were as hard as metal. The strength of his arms armed and domineering, exuding a powerful aura. In fact, although Porosalino doesn't like to be in the limelight, he is indeed a little too obsessed with his own abilities. For powers such as physical skills and domineering, Porosalino is slightly a little unfamiliar. But it is understandable. After all, his ability is really strong enough. Just by eating it and developing it casually, he can crush 70% to 80% of the masters in the sea. In this case, he will prefer the power of his shining fruit is also normal. But because of this, he was unable to resist Orgrim's Tyrannosaurus rushing elbow just now. If it were Sci-fi here, relying on his powerful armed color domineering and wrist strength, it should be able to block Orgrim's impact. Porosalino did not answer Orgrim's words. After stopping his embarrassed rolling figure, he stepped on his foot and flew directly into the sky. Then, just look at him with his arms crossed in front of his chest, and his body is emitting a dazzling golden light. 8-foot Megatama, Porosalino shouted in a low voice. 8-foot Megatama, this move can make Porosalino release thousands of golden flashes in an instant, intensively bombarding a certain area. But under Porosalino's precise control, thousands of golden flashes can be concentrated on one point to strike like a storm. At this time, golden raindrops seemed to be falling in the sky. These raindrops gradually converged and covered Orgrim's position. Orgrim looked at the scene in the sky, but he was not panicked at all. Instead, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. The muscles on his body were surging, and he shouted in a low voice, "Iron, black gold, live." The moment Orgrim finished speaking, his arm domineering energy exploded, causing his whole body to be covered in black. Then, his muscles were as hard as iron, and there was even an invisible layer of impact attached to his body. Force. This is exactly the powerful defensive move developed by Orgrim by combining the iron block, armed color haki and his own abilities among the 6 moves into one. Porosalino's golden flash poured out instantly and hit Orgrim, but it was unable to hurt Orgrim at all. At the same time, Orgrim's originally stiff muscles also became alive. Maintaining mobility under the iron block is Orgrim's practice for many years, and he has already mastered it. Otherwise, he would not easily use the power of the iron block, because it would be tantamount to a living target. With a sudden stamp of his feet, an impact force erupted, and Orgrim's dark figure rushed up into the sky against the golden light of Porosalino. Porosalino was shocked at this time. He never expected that Orgrim's attack power would be so powerful, that his speed could be increased to the point where he could hardly catch it, and that his body's self-healing power would also allow him to the wound is healed, but this defense is still so amazing. For a moment, Porosalino even felt that this Orgrim had no weaknesses. Just as Orgrim rushed forward, Porosalino also changed his tactics, folding his hands to form a triangle on his chest, and then shouted in a low voice, "Light prism." At the same time as the words fell, a triangular light prism burst out from Porosalino's hand. A large number of beams were condensed together and shot towards Orgrim's figure. Ninkong wave dragon breath, Orgrim also clasped his hands in the air, and then the power of the impact began to condense. At the moment when the light prism hit, he pushed his hands out. The powerful impact force exploded and hit the light prism. Several circular shock waves exploded in the sky above Impelton, extinguishing all the fire clouds in the sky. As the saying goes, the great sound makes the elephant invisible. Orgrim was seen in Porosalino the moment it was covered by the white smoke exploded in the air. Orgrim's figure once again broke through the distance in space, instantly closing the gap with Porosalino. It was still a kick, hitting the head, and the wave Rusalino raised his arm, covered with arm domineering, trying to block Orgrim's kick. However, the domineering forces of both parties only made contact, and Orgrim's arm domineering directly knocked Porosalino's armed look was dissipated. Then, there was a soft click sound, and Porosalino's expression changed, as if he was in some pain. Then, like a cannonball, he was kicked from Orgrim. He was kicked in the air. Boom! With a sound, Porosalino was smashed into the port, causing another violent explosion. Orgrim laughed ferociously in the air. Although he had just said something about leaving a note for Porosalino, how could he be merciful if he really took action? In the air, he stepped hard, and the moon steps exploded, causing a shock in the air, as if the space was cracked. Then Orgrim's figure, like a cannonball, hit the place where Porosalino fell just now. At the same time, there seemed to be a figure running rapidly on the sea surface of the port, leaving a trail of white waves on the sea. Just as Orgrim's figure fell, this figure also boarded the port. Through the smoke of the explosion, Orgrim's eyes flashed with a fierce look, and he caught the embarrassed figure of Porosalino who had not yet climbed up from the ruins on the ground. Heavy flow explosion raging wave, Orgrim aimed his arm at the figure and punched out. The shock wave that never dispersed was like a stormy wave, wrapping around his arm. At this moment, a man with dark arms wrapped around powerful arm domineering the figure appeared in front of Porosalino and blocked Orgrim. "Bastard, don't underestimate the navy," the figure roared angrily, and hit Orgrim's iron fist with the same punch. The armed and domineering confrontation broke out instantly. It was different from Orgrim's previous fight against Porosalino. This time, he faced the right-armed color haki is very powerful. Even Orgrim's haki started to collapse first. "Sci-fi," a flash of anger flashed in Orgrim's eyes, and he roared. That's right, the person who came across the sea and stood in front of Orgrim at the most critical moment was none other than one of the Navy's highest combat powers, the general. "Sci-fi." A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 234. At this moment, Sci-fi felt an incomparable force coming from his arm, which made him unable to hold on. But he knew that he couldn't retreat. If he took a step back here, Porosalino would die. Although he had many disagreements with Porosalino on weekdays, every time he said some kind words to Porosalino didn't take it seriously. The two even quarreled many times over their abilities and physical skills. But Porosalino was, after all, one of the backbones of the Navy and his apprentice. No matter what, Sci-fi couldn't watch him being beaten to death by Orgrim. The belief in your heart can indeed turn into strength sometimes. The ground beneath Sci-fi's feet collapsed, and his feet sank into the ground, but his arms did not bend at all. Powerful power continued to flow from his body and extended to his arms. The dark-armed domineering force is constantly solidifying, turning into invisible armor on his arms. Black Wrist Sci-fi has always dominated the world with his armed domineering spirit. Although Orgrim is strong, there is still some gap between him and veteran masters like Sci-fi in terms of domineering power. After all, his punch failed, but Sci-fi blocked the blow. "Roll!" Sci-fi roared angrily, then exerted force on his waist, and forced Orgrim to fly away. Orgrim rolled 2 punches in the air, landed on his feet, and stepped on 2 broken flowers on the ground. Feeling slightly swollen. "Next, I will be your opponent." Sci-fi's arms were dark and he looked at Orgrim with a very calm expression. Orgrim's expression was also very serious. Although Porosalino was strong, Orgrim had never considered that he would losing to him. After all, that guy is not yet at the level of a general. Orgrim, on the other hand, thinks that he has already half-stepped into the level of the highest combat power of a general. In addition, Porosalino is a bit biased, while Orgrim is fully developed. As long as the battle is dragged to his own rhythm, Porosalino will be a little bit lazy. But Sci-fi is different. Although Sci-fi has nothing special, weird ability, but Orgrim never dared to underestimate this guy. If you want to talk about the reason, there is only one point. Sci-fi is a naval admiral who represents one of the highest combat capabilities of the Navy. Perhaps from the perspective of the future, Sci-fi, the naval admiral, does not seem to have many outstanding features among the generals, but he is the mentor of those generals after all. Now, he is in his prime and at the peak of his combat effectiveness. The name of Black Wrist. He is not famous all over the world for nothing. At the same time as Sci-fi finished his words, there was a powerful and strong figure at his feet, taking the lead in attacking Orgrim. Orgrim did not dare to be too powerful, and the armed color hegemony condensed on his arms. He lowered his body a little, and punched Sci-fi with the same punch. He and Sci-fi had also fought before, but at that time, Orgrim was at a comprehensive disadvantage and was crushed. With his eyesight at that time, he couldn't see where Sci-fi was strong. But at this time, he could feel it. Orgrim punched out, but Sci-fi's figure was very strong. With his agility, he turned his head slightly and avoided the blow. At the same time, he raised one hand and pressed it against the crook of the arm hit by Orgrim's straight punch. Then, with the other hand, lifting up in an instant, he pushed his elbow into Orgrim's chest. Orgrim also reacted quickly and tried to retract the outstretched arm, but it was too late and was blocked by Zifa's other hand. So he made a prompt decision, raised his free hand, and held it against his chest with a domineering gesture. This arm blocked Zifa's elbow very accurately, and Orgrim's mouth curled up. With a smile, he was about to lift one leg and use his knee to hit Zifa's abdomen. But at this moment, Zifa seemed to have predicted Orgrim's action, and his elbow suddenly slid down. Then, he pushed his shoulder forward, and the palm of his hand pressed down on Orgrim's knee very smoothly, forcing Orgrim's knee strike down again. At the same time, his shoulder also hit Orgrim. Rem's chest. Open, Zifa shouted in a low voice. In Orgrim's previous life, he heard that in Bajikwan, there was a fighting style called Tishanguo, but at that time, this kind of boxing technique had been played by various masters its bad, such as Taiki Horse Master, etc. Its reputation has been ruined for a long time, so Orgrim didn't take it seriously. I have only seen it occasionally in some videos, but at this time, Zifa will definitely not do this. Something like Bajikwan, but when he leaned over the shoulder, it had the same effect. Orgrim felt a pain in his chest, and a stream of blood could not help but flow from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes became a little black, and then, his feet lifted off the ground, and he was knocked away by Zifa's arm. However, this flying was not really flying, it was just his feet leaving the ground and flying back 4 or 5 meters. Then, Orgrim stepped on the ground, but he did not stand firm. While releasing the force from his feet, he took 4 or 5 steps back before he stabilized his figure. As soon as he raised his head, he saw that Zephyr had pressed against him again. Come over. Orgrim's eyes were shocked. When he fought with Zifa before, he had never seen Zifa use any skills at all. Come to think of it, at that time, Zifa didn't need any skills to deal with him. But now, Zephyr showed off his fighting skills that had been honed over time in the military formation. Seeing Zephyr punch him, Orgrim instinctively raised his arms, trying to cross them to block him. He stepped forward to resist Zifa's punch. But just when the punch was about to hit Orgrim's arm, Zifa's figure suddenly disappeared from in front of Orgrim. Shave, Orgrim reacted suddenly. He saw Se Haki and sensed Zifa's movements, but knowing it is one thing, and whether he can keep up is another matter. This shaved step and the combination of boxing seems to be Zifa's unique skill. At the same time that his figure appeared, the punch that was supposed to hit Orgrim's arm was also very smooth and hit Orgrim without any abruptness. On Orgrim's back. It was as if he suddenly moved and the target was Orgrim's back. Orgrim asked himself that he also had some experience in shaving steps, but if such a seamless connection could be achieved, it seemed that still not working. He staggered and took 2 steps forward. At the same time, Orgrim was not without the power to fight back. The moment he stood firm, he swept his leg and threw it back. Boom, with a muffled sound, Zifa raised his arms to block Orgrim's powerful blow. Then, Zifa crossed his arms and wrapped them around Orgrim's legs, as if he was about to what a new move. Orgrim was shocked. Without hesitation, he lowered his body, put his hands on the ground, raised his other foot, kicked back, and kicked Zifa. This kick was a little bit beyond Zifa's expectation. He originally wanted to twist Orgrim's leg directly, but now, he can't do it. He didn't even have time to stop. Was kicked in the chest by Orgrim. The powerful kick carried the power of the shock wave, kicking Zifa back a few steps. This short fight was not like the fight with Polosa just now. Like Lino, he opens and closes at will, destroying the surroundings at every turn. But the danger is no worse than before, and both of them have concentrated their strength on their bodies without leaking at all. The difficulty is not ordinary. Hi. While kicking Zifa away, Orgrim stretched out his hands again, turned half a circle in the air, and landed firmly on the ground with both feet. This time, Orgrim did not give Zifa he had the opportunity to strike first. As soon as his feet landed on the ground, the shock wave exploded. He raised his arms and hit Zifa directly. Thunder plow hot knife, Orgrim shouted in a low voice. Zifa had just stood firm at this time. He looked up and saw Orgrim's figure rushing over. The arm seemed to be aimed directly at his neck. The corners of Zifa's mouth hung up. With a smile and a short body, he also imitated Orgrim. He raised his arms and bent his feet. He slammed into Orgrim. In an instant, the two collided with each other, but the hot thunder plow knife did not hit Zifa's neck. Instead, it hung on his arm. The two were like wrestlers wrestling, with half of their bodies surpassing each other, and they could see each other's back. The arms were intertwined together, and arm-domineering energy burst out from them, bringing up a strong airflow, and the space also felt slightly broken. If we talk about a pure domineering contest, Orgrim is not as good as Zifa, but at this time, domineering in addition, there is also a competition of strength. Orgrim's arm muscles bulge, and the veins are twisting on it. Zifa's face is also very ferocious, with a look of gnashing teeth. "Drink," Zifa roared. "Hey!" Orgrim also shouted in a low voice. The ground beneath the two of them collapsed directly, and the stones exploded were as powerful as bullets. This stalemate seemed to last for about 3 or 5 breaths, and both of them seemed to realize it. They couldn't defeat each other. So at the same moment, Zifa and Orgrim changed their moves together. Orgrim suddenly exerted force on the hand hanging on Zifa's arm, and pulled Zifa towards him. The same is true for Fa. The two forces intertwined, and in an instant, the shoulders of Orgrim and Zifa hit each other, and their heads were also pressed together. As if there was a tacit understanding, Orgrim's other hand punched Zifa in the abdomen, and Zifa also punched Orgrim in the stomach. After the two punches fell, Zifa and Orgrim's expressions were slightly changed and looked a little painful, but neither of them stopped. In just a few moments, they punched each other 17 or 80 times. Until blood spilled from the corner of Orgrim's mouth again, and blood flowed from Zifa's nasal cavity. With blood, their arms released their strength at the same time, and then they raised their legs to kick each other in a tacit understanding. At the same time, they took a few steps back to the left and right to release the strength. At this time, Orgrim and Ze there were several dark fist marks on Fa's abdomen, with bruises lingering on them. Their arms also felt a little sore and swollen. After this fight, Orgrim discovered that he had indeed made no mistake in judgment. If Zifa is the standard, his strength has indeed reached the level of a general. Zifa looked at Orgrim with a very calm expression. Sure enough, this guy is no longer what he used to be. Can get it, his strength has already touched the top level in the sea. Monthly ticket for flowers, please big guys. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 235. Orgrim moved his arms a little, raised his hand to wipe away the blood from the corner of his mouth, then put an evil smile on his face, looked at Zifa and said, "You lose." Zifa was stunned for a moment. Is this guy a little too inflated? Even if I was evenly matched with you just now, it can't be said to be at a disadvantage, right? What's more, this brief confrontation was more about testing each other. Zifa thought that he had tested the upper limit of Orgrim's strength. He was very strong, but still a little worse than himself. Just like this, I didn't even say you lose, yet you dare to speak. Gee ha 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 ha, Zifa, if the support of your navy is only you and Porisalino, then you made a mistake this time. I chose the right time. Orgrim said with a smile. Speaking arrogantly, Orgrim, are you too arrogant? Zifa also moved his arms and said with a gloomy face. Arrogant? Gee ha 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 ha, Don't forget, my combatants are now in Impelton. There is no force in Impelton that can resist them. It won't be long before they bring Boss Shiji with them. Come out, can you stop us when the time comes? Orgrim laughed and said. Zifa's expression changed slightly, but he still forced himself to say, you know nothing about Imperialon's power. Whether it is true or false, you know in your heart. Orgrim waved his hand domineeringly and said. Even if Shiji can come out, he is still a remnant of the past. How much strength can he use? As for your subordinates, when Zifa said this, he seemed a little less confident. But soon, his face straightened up and he said, it doesn't matter, as long as I capture you before that, all problems will be solved. Gee ha 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 ha, take me down? You are the one who is called arrogant. Orgrim laughed loudly and said. Don't underestimate the Admiral of the Navy. Zifa glared angrily. No, I have never underestimated the combat effectiveness of your Navy. After all, I also agree that your Navy is the well-deserved overlord on this sea. But now, things are different, Zifa. I just said you lost, not because of my subordinates and Boss Shiji, but because, it's going to be dark today, Orgrim said softly. At this time, the sun was setting, and half of the sun had fallen into the sea. In a short while, night will fall. This is also Orgrim's choice. Yes, the surprise attack on Impelton was one thing, and it was another thing to calculate that the Navy's high-level combat power was empty. It was also another thing to expand its advantages to the best situation. Therefore, Orgrim chose to launch the plan in the afternoon. After a battle, it was almost dark at this time. Zifa was stunned for a moment after hearing Orgrim's words, and then his expression suddenly changed, as if he had thought of something. He once heard Kuzan mention it, Orgrim in the dark, combat power, seems like it can soar quickly. Although this information has not been confirmed yet, Zifa does not dare to be careless. He would rather believe that it exists than that it does not exist. Therefore, the moment his expression changed, he seemed to have made up his mind. He had no intention of talking nonsense with Orgrim anymore. He stepped hard on his feet and rushed towards Orgrim. Unless you can defeat me within 15 minutes, otherwise, you lose, Orgrim said with a confident smile. As he finished speaking, he stamped his feet violently, and a shockwave erupted. The figure moved and crashed into Zifa. Come on, Orgrim shouted in a low voice. Just as he and Zephyr collided, the doom hammer falling on the ground in the distance seemed to hear Orgrim's call. In an instant, the high temperature broke out, the war hammer turned red, and then, the hot airflow spread out from the war hammer. The war hammer directly bounced off the ground with the heat wave and airflow, and flew towards Orgrim's palm. Zifa's eyes flashed. Shen grabbed Orgrim's arm, as if he didn't want him to get his war hammer. At the same time, Porisalino also raised his hand and hit the war hammer with a golden light. Boom! With a sound, the war hammer was blown into the sky. After spinning several times in the air, the war hammer fell towards where Orgrim and Zephyr were. It was too late, but it was too soon. Zifa didn't have too many scruples. He gave a headbutt and hit Orgrim's head directly. This sudden blow stunned Orgrim, causing him to move a beat slower. Zephyr stepped on Orgrim's knee, jumped up, and grabbed the war hammer falling from the air. Don't, Orgrim reminded him instinctively. Zifa didn't take it seriously, and grabbed the warhammer very accurately. Then his figure turned around in the air and landed 5 steps away in front of Orgrim. As soon as he regained his footing, Zephyr picked up his warhammer and smashed it towards Orgrim. But as soon as I took action, I seemed to feel something bad, it was so hot. So damn hot. At this time, Zifa's hands were wrapped with armed domineering energy, but he was still unable to resist the continuous high temperature. The moment the warhammer was swung out, white smoke was already rising from his hands. The hot feeling made Zifa couldn't help but let go of his hands. For a moment, it was as if he had thrown the war hammer to Orgrim himself. Orgrim burst into laughter, caught the red war hammer, then looked at Zifa and said, "Gee ha 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 ha, I have reminded you not to touch my war hammer, but you still don't listen. My big baby is not only thick, but also hard, and it's extremely hot." Zifa was so miserable that he couldn't express his pain at this moment. When he lowered his head, he saw that there were several blisters on his palms. Before Zephyr could speak, Orgrim laughed ferociously and said, "I'll have my ashes scattered for you today." As soon as he finished speaking, Orgrim held the hammer in both hands, stepped on it, and struck Zephyr with the hammer. Past. Zifa was startled, and with a domineering twist of his arms, he grabbed Orgrim's war hammer. With his previous experience, he did not dare to confront Orgrim, and resisted for a moment, and then, he suddenly opened his arms and forced Orgrim's war hammer away. At the same time, he punched Orgrim in the chest again, and a ruthless look flashed in Orgrim's eyes. He did not dodge or parry. He withstood Zifa's punch and couldn't bear it. A mouthful of old blood spurted out, along with some fragments of internal organs. At the same time, the war hammer in his hand also hit Zifa's shoulder. This blow directly knocked Zifa away. At the same time, Zifa's shoulder also exuded a burnt smell of cooked meat. With just one blow, the high-temperature war hammer scorched Zifa's muscles. At this time, Porosalino seemed to have recovered. One of his arms was broken, but it did not hinder the performance of his abilities. The moment Zifa was knocked away, a laser shot towards Orgrim. Orgrim swung the warhammer in his hand, and blasted the laser with the hammer from a distance. However, before he could strike again, Porosalino's figure had turned into golden light and appeared on the side of Orgrim. If there was no warhammer in his hand, Orgrim might be able to keep up with the speed, but now with the heavy warhammer in his hand, Orgrim could not keep up with Porosalino's extremely fast speed. I wanted to raise my hand to block it, but couldn't reach it immediately. Fortunately, he raised his shoulders and turned his body slightly, and the blow that Porosalino was going to hit him on the head actually hit him on the shoulder. This kick seemed to be filled with Porosalino's resentment and was extremely powerful. Orgrim's feet loosened and he failed to grasp the ground, and his figure was directly kicked out. At the same time, Zifa was also very fast. Like a black shadow, he crashed directly into Orgrim. He hit Orgrim's chest with his head, and his arms suddenly circled around him, hugging Orgrim. "Old waste. Asshole," Orgrim cursed. Before he could react, Zifa lowered his waist. He was not as tall as Orgrim. This lowered his waist, and his focus was almost on the ground. Therefore, he put his shoulder against Orgrim, pressed Orgrim's back to the ground, and rubbed it away. Orgrim was also a little confused at this time. "This move is so familiar, isn't it? Isn't this what I used to deal with the tigress in Jun when I was in the capital of Seven Waters?" Before Orgrim could think about it, there was a stinging pain from rubbing the ground on his back. Orgrim gritted his teeth and endured the pain, and hit Zifa on the back with his elbow. However, Zifa was strong, and he was not short of elbows. After rubbing against Orgrim for more than 10 meters, he roared, forcibly lifted Orgrim from the ground, swung his waist, and pushed Orgrim away. Mew threw it towards Tiansheng. Porosalino's figure was there at this moment. At the same moment when Orgrim went up to the sky, he kicked out again. This time, the kick hit Orgrim's head. "Shine light speed kick," Porosalino shouted angrily. With a loud bang, Orgrim felt his head sink, and his figure quickly hit the ground. Then the explosion submerged him, and he felt severe pain all over his body then. Porosalino in the air was unyielding, and with his unbroken hand, he fired 7 or 8 laser beams towards the place where Orgrim fell, setting off a continuous sound of explosions. The battle between masters sometimes happens in an instant. Zifa and Porosalino are not incompetent people. On the contrary, one of them has the strength of a general, and the other is almost touching the threshold of a general. Although the relationship was not good, they were still masters and disciples. Together they joined forces and launched a continuous offensive. In one breath, Orgrim was unable to fight back and fell directly into a disadvantage. However, at this moment, in the smoke of the explosion, a warhammer flew out and hit Porisalino in the air. Porisalino had to stop the laser in his hand. A golden light shifted his position. When the warhammer struck again when he fell, Orgrim's figure reappeared in the smoke. He grabbed the fallen warhammer in his hand. At the same time, the slightly embarrassed figure also whispered softly, "God blacken." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 236. On the 6th floor of Impelton, as soon as the prison elevator door opened, a body soaked in venom was thrown out. Then, a burst of gunfire rang out, and the corpse was beaten into a sieve. Be careful, the guard standing in front of the elevator shouted. But before he finished speaking, a girl with twin ponytails suddenly jumped out from the side of the elevator. At this time, the girl had a crazy smile on her face. Even some of the guards standing in the front row could see that her face was still stained with blood that had not yet dried up. Ha ha ha, are you ready to face the metal storm of Lord Sphinx? The Sphinx laughed crazily. As soon as she finished speaking, the Gatling gun in her hand roared. Flames burst out from the muzzle, and the bullets were connected in a long string, directed towards the jailers. It poured out. Fortunately, the guards at Imperial seemed to be well prepared. The guards in the first row held heavy bulletproof shields in their hands and pressed them against the ground, bending their waists to resist the Sphinx's attack. Metal storm. Get ready, wait for her bullets to run out, and then fire back immediately. Halashi ammunition is ready. A jailer like a squad leader hid behind the shield and made arrangements. Logically speaking, his order should be no problem. But the mistake was that their opponent was the little Lolita Sphinx, and Sphinx, the Gatling gun in Max's hand, is a treasure of devil fruit technology, with unlimited bullets. Ha 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 ha, I like your turtle shell defense best, the Sphinx laughed crazily. She held the Gatling gun in one hand, spitting out tongues of fire, and took steps with her feet. As the distance between the Sphinx and the jailers got closer and closer, the firepower in his hands became more and more fierce. Countless bullets hit the thick shield. At first, there were no traces, but soon, craters began to appear one by one. Then, the shield seemed to be broken. Feel. How many bullets does that guy have? The captain of the jailer was already a little flustered at this time. Captain, the shield is going to break, a jailer said with some horror. But as soon as he finished speaking, the crazy pouring bullets seemed to have stopped spraying. Counterattack, the captain of the jailer said with a happy face. The jailers hiding behind heavy shields held muskets in their hands. When they poked their heads out, their expressions were frozen. At this time, the Sphinx was already 5 or 6 meters away from them, and she was holding a delicate grenade in her hand, and the ring on the grenade had fallen at her feet. Although grenades are very uncommon on the market, they are not completely unavailable, so these jailers recognized them at first sight. Ha ha ha, are you surprised? Is it surprising? Lord Sphinx's gift from hell arrives. The Sphinx laughed evilly, then gently threw the grenade in his hand behind the shield. As if the time was right, as soon as the grenade hit the ground, it bounced up and didn't even land a second time. The roar of the explosion reached everyone's ears. The Sphinx didn't seem to care at all that he was only 4 or 5 meters away from the explosion. Instead, he opened his arms and let the heavy Gatling gun hang in front of him, looking like he was enjoying it very much. The firelight reflected on her face, and a thick shield was blown away from her side, grazing her ponytail and hitting the elevator door. Whether it was a coincidence or good luck, the Sphinx was not harmed at all despite being so close. When the blast of air fell, her twin ponytails swaying in the air also fell. Ha 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 ha, Lord Sphinx is the tallest, Sphinx shouted excitedly. After she finished speaking, some figures began to walk out of the elevator from both sides. It was Beckman and others. It's too slow. I won't let you be the vanguard next time. If I were to take action, it would only take 10 seconds to kill them. Beckman kicked away the shield blocking the road and said to the Sphinx with some dissatisfaction. What do you know? This is art, the art of gunpowder and guns. Are you dissatisfied with my performance? The Sphinx responded very unhappily. Neiman hurriedly walked to the Sphinx and said, stop talking about these useless things, quickly, find where the Admiral is being held. The sound insulation effect of the 6th floor is very good. Even if Beckman and others attack all the way down, even if Orgrim blows up Imperialton's magnificent building on the sea, in this infinite hell, it was still quiet before. But as soon as the Sphinx appeared, it brought the art of explosion to this silent infinite hell. Therefore, many big pirates imprisoned here were very curious and stared excitedly. Outside the cage, Shiji was imprisoned in the deepest part, and he heard the movements outside, so he couldn't help but be a little curious. As for prison robbery, he really didn't think much about it. Impelton would occasionally have exercises, so Shiki thought they were doing some sort of drill. You keep making noises and preventing people from having a good rest. When I get out, I will kill all you bastards, Shiji snorted softly. Then, he was still lying on the dark ground, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. But not long after, he heard a burst of chaotic footsteps outside the cage, and then many pirates became excited. Hey, let me out. Do you know who I am? Let me out, I promise to make you enjoy the food and drink. Cap. I'm going to kill that bastard Cap and let me out for revenge. Open my prison, or I will kill you. Roger. Roger, is he dead? That bastard Whitebeard, is he invincible on the sea now? Shiji opened his eyes in surprise and even sat up from the ground. He had already discovered it at this time. It seemed that something really went wrong. Because his prison was deep inside, he still couldn't see the outside at this time. What happened? He was just about to stand up and observe the situation. Suddenly he heard a very familiar voice. Shut up, I'll shoot you in the head. The voice fell, and then Shiji heard a gunshot and the wail of a pirate. Tell me, where is Boss Shiji locked up? The Sphinx shouted again. This time, Shiji became completely excited. Damn it, it's the Sphinx. Does this mean she's here to rob the prison? Sphinx? Sphinx? I'm here, Shiji shouted excitedly. He didn't even realize that he seemed to have lost his grace. Admiral, Ni Man exclaimed, and then ran towards Shiji's cage very excitedly. When he saw it, it turned out to be Shiji. He was wearing a black and white striped prison uniform, with 2 seaweed hanging from his feet. Lucy was shackled, his face was a little sallow, and there was even some blood on his body, as if it was the blood stains caused by the original injury. Overall, Shiji's condition at this time was not very good, and he even felt a little weak. But his eyes were still piercing, without any trace of decadence. Even though he was wearing prisoner's clothes, he was as unruly as a lion. However, this lion seems to be temporarily trapped in the circus. Neiman, it is indeed you, why are you here? Shiji asked excitedly. Neiman also had tears in her eyes at this time. She didn't answer anything. Instead, she grabbed the railings of the cage with both hands. Then the muscles of her arms bulged, and her body seemed to swell. Ah! Neiman roared angrily, and kept exerting force in her hands, forcing the cage fence made of fine steel to open. At the same time, Sphinx was also excited to see his Shiji boss. Neiman had just opened some gaps in the fence, and Sphinx had already gotten in thanks to her slender figure. She hugged Shiji, regardless of the stains and stench on Shiji's body, and cried loudly. "Admiral, we finally found you. Why are you so stupid? Why do you want to go to Marineford alone? Do you know that we are worried to death about that guy in Orgrim? He can't eat or sleep, and he talks about you every day," cried the Sphinx. Shiji was stunned for a moment. As a pirate tycoon, he rarely showed any emotion, but this time, he was really moved. In Pelton, for 800 years, there has never been a deep-sea prison without any mistakes. It is known as the Impel City of Iron, walled by the world government. Although Shiji had thought about escaping from prison, he didn't have high expectations, let alone fantasizing about his subordinates coming to rob the prison. Fortunately, they actually came. By the way, where's Orgrim? Where is he? Shiji thought of something and asked. "Boss Shiji, Mr. Hammer is up there, fighting with Magellan, or even with the support of the Navy headquarters. We will be responsible for rescuing you," Rengar said quickly. Beckman also got in from outside the railing, holding a bunch of keys in his hand, squatting at Shiji's feet and constantly trying to open the lock. Speaking of which, Imperialon's internal defenses, his strength is not very high, even 20 years later, when Blackbeard and Luffy come to make trouble. The only ones who can fight are Magellan and Shiryu. That bastard Shiryu betrayed the revolution. Now, it's almost the same. There isn't much advanced combat power. The main reason why Impelton is like a dragon's pond and a tiger's den is that it is a trinity with the island that never sleeps, Judiciary Island, and the naval headquarters, Marineford. Therefore, Beckman and the others broke through this place very quickly. The reason why they arrived a little late is because they were on the 4th floor and were looking for the key to Shiji's 6th floor for a long time. "It is this," Beckman murmured with a smile. As soon as his voice fell, Shiji heard the crisp sound of the shackles falling to the ground. Then, Shiji felt that his lost strength and lost ability quickly returned to his body. This feeling, "It's been a long time," Shiji closed his eyes and whispered softly. Then, he slowly opened his eyes and said with a smile on his lips, "After all, this sea is indispensable for me, the Golden Lion, gee ha 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 ha." "Congratulations, Boss Shiji," Beckman stood up and said with a smile. Shiji patted Beckman on the shoulder with satisfaction, and then said, "Thanks to you, let's go, follow me to see Orgrim." "Admiral, your sword." Neiman handed the 2 knives to Shiji. Rengar put a large cloak on Shiji's shoulders very naturally, and the Sphinx took out a cigar from somewhere, handed it to Shiji, and lit the lighter. He exhaled a puff of smoke, and Shiji slowly walked out of the prison, with an evil smile on his lips. At this moment, the proud Golden Lion, break free from the prison of fate. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 237. The sun sank beneath the sea, and everything fell into darkness. Zifa was staring at Orgrim's slightly embarrassed figure at this time. After being beaten violently by Zifa and Porosalino together, Orgrim's body was now covered in blood, and the muscles on his chest were even a little scorched, but he was holding the doom hammer in his hand, and his expression looked a little comfortable. "Ever since I left Avalon and the Sea of Eternal Night, I haven't felt this dark night for a long time," Orgrim whispered softly. Then, the aura on his body began to surge, and it continued to rise. After a while, from a long distance away, it brought a faint oppressive force to Zifa and Porosalino. "He can indeed become stronger in the dark. What kind of ability is this?" Zifa whispered softly with some surprise in his eyes. "I don't know, but this is definitely not the power of Devil Fruit. His ability is Impact. I have never heard that Impact can become stronger in the dark." Porosalino stood beside Zifa and responded in a low voice. "Is that guy's talent?" Zifa frowned. "His strong physical fitness, brutal strength, and abnormal resilience. In the past, These talents of Orgrim were enough to be called abnormal. 99% of the people in the sea would envy them. And now, he can actually become stronger in the dark night. This kind of talent, Sci-fi is really envious. If this guy hadn't encountered those shitty things in the North Sea, if he had come into the Navy headquarters site earlier. If you cut him off and let him become an excellent Navy. So now, the Navy has one more future flag bearer. Sci-fi, I said, if you can't defeat me before night comes, it means you have lost. Orgrim suddenly spoke to Sci-fi. Sci-fi's expression remained unchanged and he said in a deep voice, "Don't be too arrogant, Orgrim." Arrogant? Orgrim smiled evilly, and then continued, "No, I am just stating a fact." The moment these words fell, Orgrim's feet suddenly exerted force, and the ground under the ruins cracked instantly. His figure seemed to tear through the night, and rushed in front of Sci-fi at an extremely fast speed, with the warhammer in his hand. He hit Sci-fi unceremoniously on the head. So fast, Sci-fi was shocked and said. At this time, it was too late to hide. Sci-fi could only raise his arm, wrapped in armed and domineering power, and wanted to put it in front of his head to block the blow. Fortunately, Porosalino's reaction speed is slightly faster than Sci-fi's. When Orgrim hit Sci-fi on the head with a sledgehammer, Porosalino also kicked out and kicked Orgrim in the chest. The golden beam particles hit Orgrim's chest, kicking the somewhat charred muscles into pieces. Orgrim's figure paused for a moment, and stepped on the ground, leaving 2 footprints. But Porosalino's sudden kick did not knock Orgrim away. His power, Porosalino was a little surprised. With the same force, he kicked Orgrim away just now, but now, it didn't even make him retreat, it just slipped under his feet. However, this kick caused Orgrim to pause for a moment. Sci-fi blocked his head with his arms before Orgrim's hammer fell. 80, Orgrim roared angrily, and smashed down the warhammer in his hand. The warhammer with a strong impact hit Sci-fi's arm. Sci-fi's arm withstood this force, and his elbow involuntarily bent inward. For a moment, he held the warhammer and put his arms against his forehead. Fortunately, Sci-fi is also a master of arm domineering, and he is the famous Black Wrist. The arm domineering on both arms is particularly powerful. This blow failed to break through his resistance, but his feet were like nails, driven into the ground by Orgrim's hammer. Speed of light, Porosalino was extremely fast. After Orgrim's hammer fell, he raised his foot and struck again. However, this time, Orgrim's eyes flashed, and the hammer he held with both hands instantly turned into one hand. Then, with his free hand, he grabbed the void in front of his chest. It seemed that he had caught Lonely, but when he grasped it, he happened to grab Porosalino's leg accurately. "How many times are you going to use the same move on me?" Orgrim said with a cruel smile on his lips. As he finished speaking, he exerted force in his hand, and the force of the impact exploded directly in his hand. The arm domineering force captured Porosalino's entity, causing him to unable to smoothly transform into elements. This strong impact exploded, causing Porosalino's expression to change, with a look of pain. At the same time, Sci-fi also raised his arms and pushed away Orgrim's warhammer. The black fist suddenly punched Orgrim on the chin. This blow caused Orgrim to stagger and take a step back. At the same time, he exerted force in his hand and grabbed Porosalino, like rubbish, smashed it to the ruins in the distance. Porosalino was thrown away here, Sci-fi's legs were pulled out from under the ground, and the strong figure rushed towards Orgrim. The warhammer in Orgrim's hand danced, and before Zephyr struck the next punch, he pulled it casually, and the warhammer roared and hit Zephyr. The warhammer collided with Sci-fi's iron fist, and the arm domineering energy exploded, and a powerful opposing air wave erupted from between the two. "Gee ha 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 ha, 2 against 1 is nothing more than that," Orgrim laughed arrogantly. Sci-fi's expression was gloomy and he didn't respond. He used force in his hand to push away Orgrim's warhammer. Then, he got close and hit Orgrim's chest with an elbow. "Iron nugget black gold," Orgrim shouted in a low voice. After the words fell, Zifa's elbow hit Orgrim's chest. He only felt that he hit an iron plate. The ulcer on Orgrim's chest, the muscles were slightly dented, but they firmly blocked Zifa's elbow. "Hateful," Zifa cursed secretly. It is clearly the sixth form of the Navy, a superhuman physical skill that has been summarized by generations of Navy masters. It turns out that Orgrim learned it better than most of the Navy, but he is still the enemy of the Navy and an evil pirate. This what a slap in the face. At the same time, Orgrim's free hand also bent inward, and struck Zifa in the chest with an elbow. "Iron block," Zifa followed suit. He was also extremely proficient in the sixth form of the Navy, and even Orgrim didn't know about it. Zifa can also move freely under the iron block, and even does it better than the werewolf Gabber in the future. Boom! There was an explosion, and sure enough, Zifa blocked Orgrim's elbow with the help of his armed domineering force and the power of iron. However, there was no frustrated look on Orgrim's face. Instead, there was a smile of success. "The secret of 6 styles Bhong 6 King's Spear," Orgrim chuckled. As soon as he finished speaking, the elbow on Zifa's chest suddenly burst out with a powerful force, the secret of the 6 styles, and the 6 King's Spear. This is one of the most powerful killing moves that has been refined over thousands of times in the sixth form of the Navy. The most important thing about this killing move is the explosion of impact. It turns the power in the body into a little bit and explodes it. This powerful blow can even a big hole was opened in the air between huge warships. Not to mention, Orgrim is a user with the power of impact fruit. For him, the power of impact is as simple as breathing air. Zifa's expression suddenly changed. As soon as he changed, he felt a heavy blow on his chest, his eyes bulged slightly, and a mouthful of old blood came out of his mouth. He wanted to swallow it, but in the end he couldn't, and couldn't help but spit it out. Then, unable to support the force under his feet were slightly off the ground. Then, his strong body, like a cannonball, was blown away by Orgrim's blow. Fortunately, Zifa's reaction speed was very fast. When his body was rolling against the ground, he suddenly stretched out a hand and clasped the ground. Then, 5 fingers plowed deep marks on the ground, and finally stopped. He just stood up. Orgrim has already attacked again with a sledgehammer. "Admiral?" "But that's it," Orgrim mocked arrogantly, and then smashed the warhammer in his hand. Although Zifa was seriously injured and very uncomfortable, he still quickly raised his right hand, trying to resist Orgrim's warhammer. At the same time, the left hand is clenched into a fist, and the invisible domineering energy is emitted outwards. This is the second stage of armed domineering. Zephyr has also been waiting for an opportunity to defeat Orgrim with one blow. Now, he seems to have waited for this opportunity. Orgrim has become arrogant. Before, he had been dodging to some extent. But now, whether it is Porosalino's kick or his own elbow just now, it seems that as the night falls, Orgrim no longer bothers to dodge these attacks. He prefers to use tyrannical physical fitness to withstand these attacks. To win this battle with a crushing attitude. So Zifa decided to seize this opportunity and use a higher level of domineering power to directly destroy Orgrim's internal organs. Even if this bastard doesn't die, he should lose his fighting ability, right? The warhammer roared, and Orgrim's eyes flashed. Overflowing with domineering power, Zifa also had a dignified look in his eyes. Just when Orgrim's warhammer was about to hit Zifa's arm, an evil smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Soul Impact Overlord posture," Orgrim suddenly shouted. Zifa was stunned for a moment after hearing these words. Then, he felt a powerful overlord-like domineering energy burst out from Orgrim's body. "This is nothing, Zifa is very skilled. It can even be said that he instinctively concentrated his energy to resist this domineering force. After all, as a naval admiral, the enemies he encountered were almost all the top masters on the sea, and those who knew the domineering force were not there. There are only a few. But this kind of power is naturally invincible when used to deal with ordinary minions. But if you want to deal with him, Sci-fi, it is a bit inappropriate, right? But as soon as this kind of thought arises, Sci-fi feels a sudden change in front of him. What? His head went blank. An impact on his soul caused his thinking to stop for a moment. Just at this moment, the armed domineering energy in his body completely dissipated. It was as if he had been purified by Orgrim, and he lost all resistance in an instant. It was too late to say, but it was too soon. This soul impact only lasted a short moment. When Sci-fi regained his consciousness again, Orgrim's warhammer had just fallen. But at this time, Sci-fi's armed domineering spirit was gone. I wanted to use it again, but it wasn't that fast. He combines his ability with his overlord color, Sci-fi thought in horror. It's unmistakable, that was not just a pure domineering look, it seemed. There is also the ability to impact fruits, but this time the ability is a bit weird. The wrath of the Balrog, Orgrim roared angrily. The red-hot warhammer in his hand struck Sci-fi's undefended right arm, black smoke erupted. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 238. The energy brought by the high fever directly invaded Sci-fi's arm, without the defense of armed domineering. Sci-fi's arms could not withstand this force at all, and his wheat-colored skin was quickly eroded by the heat, turning into a charred black appearance in the blink of an eye. Then, the charred blackness continued to spread to Sci-fi's elbow, and then, the powerful force and pressure caused the charred black skin to shatter into fly ash. I saw that the muscles under the skin also turned into ashes, and then the bones wrapped under the muscles were exposed. There was a crunching sound, and the bones were first burned black by the high temperature, and then broke directly from the elbow with just one blow. Admiral Sci-fi's right arm was completely destroyed by Orgrim's hammers. Hija could not cure it the good kind. Aha! Zephyr screamed in pain, his eyes were rapidly bloodshot and red, with a crazy look in his eyes. At the same time, because this blow completely destroyed Zephyr's arm, the warhammer in Orgrim's hand also lost its support, and it was so powerful. Before he could retract his power in time, he hit the ground with the hammer. Sci-fi had already realized that his arm was broken, but as a naval admiral, he had rich combat experience and did not care about his broken arm at all. Seizing this opportunity, on the other hand, armed domineering burst out, directly entering the second stage. At the same time that Orgrim's warhammer landed, Sci-fi punched Orgrim in the chest. The second stage of armed domineering was not resisted by Orgrim's strong muscles, and the invisible force penetrated his chest instantly. Then, Orgrim's expression changed, and he spat out a mouthful of blood in pain. The blood was mixed with a large number of fragments of internal organs. His foot slipped, and Sci-fi's hateful blow was so powerful that it directly knocked Orgrim away. After landing, Orgrim felt that all his internal organs were shattered, and a weak aura spread in his body. His feet went soft, he grabbed the warhammer and knelt on one knee. Wow, Orgrim couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. At this time, Sci-fi wanted to take advantage of the situation to pursue him, but he could not resist the pain coming from his arm. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead and his body was shaking slightly. He covered his broken elbow, which was still burnt black. He could even see it. The exposed bones were half burned black. The forearm on his right hand can never be found again. It has turned into fly ash. This time, both sides suffer. In the dark night, Orgrim has a strength that is not weaker than Sci-fi, but Sci-fi is a naval admiral after all, and it is impossible to crush him. Being able to play with such strength made Orgrim very satisfied, not to mention that he seized the opportunity and directly disabled one of his hands. In fact, According to Orgrim's thoughts just now, what he hopes most is that Zifa fails to resist, and he blows his head off with a hammer and scatters his ashes. But in the end, this idea failed to come true, but even if he lost one of his hands, it would be considered a complete meritorious deed. Orgrim was already content. After all, this seems to be a lose-lose situation, but it's not like he hasn't been injured this badly. Didn't Whitebeard shatter all his internal organs in the first place? And he only needs a period of recuperation before he can return to his original state. According to Zifa, if you have the guts, you can grow a hand. As for the soul impact just now, Orgrim had this idea in the church in the capital of Seven Waters several years ago, but it didn't take long for him to gain the ability. It can't really be developed to that deep level, although the Dragon King's Sai has already made Shiji and others feel very amazing. But in the final analysis, it is just a matter of compressing the energy of the impact and then blasting it out. It is just a matter of quantity and has nothing to do with quality. But Orgrim was never satisfied. He only manifested the impact fruit in this outer layer, and could only release the impact force arbitrarily. He wanted to conceptually develop the power of impact. Speaking of this matter, the ability developer that Orgrim admires most is not Whitebeard, the strongest man. In the final analysis, Whitebeard is just infinitely amplifying the power of the shock fruit. It can destroy the world, but in terms of other concepts, Whitebeard didn't do any unexpected moves. Although for him, it is enough that the power of the earthquake fruit can be infinitely amplified and destroy the world. The ability developer that Orgrim really admired was Bartholomew Bear. It was an ordinary meatball fruit, but he had to play tricks on it. The development he carried out was almost all conceptual development. As for Orgrim, he is following Bartholomew Bear as an example to conceptually implement his abilities. This kind of deep ability development is very difficult. It is not just a matter of imagination, but there are many problems that need to be solved. After so many years, Orgrim has not been able to develop many methods, but with the help of the power of Overlord's Haki, he was finally able to briefly combine this power with the ability to impact fruits. It causes an explosion of soul shock, and against ordinary people, this kind of power is enough to destroy the opponent's thinking in an instant and directly turn them into idiots. But against a top master like Zifa, I am afraid that I can only get a momentary gap, allowing the opponent to become a blank slate and stand there as a target. Although it was only this moment, it was enough. After all, this first attack completely destroyed the Admiral's arm. The result was remarkable. Orgrim knew very well that if he wanted to fight against a naval admiral like Zifa, with his current strength, it was best not to delay for any time, but to seize the opportunity and give him a hard blow. Otherwise, with the strength and physical strength of the two of them, wouldn't they be able to fight to the death? If you are not careful, it will be done, and that will be embarrassing. Originally, your physical strength is not as strong as that of Zifa. You rely on cheating to fight him. If it is done and you fall into a weak state, it will be nonsense. A calf? That's why Orgrim made a dangerous move and found a way to kill Zifa directly. Now the situation in Pelton is very embarrassing. I don't know if Magellan is dead or not. Anyway, he is buried under the ruins and has not moved for such a long time. Poor Asalino had broken one of his hands before. Just now, Orgrim was confident that he would definitely break another leg of his, and it would be considered useless in a short time. Now, the same is true for Zifa. But Orgrim also forcibly blew out one of Zifa's arms, resulting in a blow from the second stage armed Haki, which severely damaged all his internal organs. In a short period of time, he didn't seem to have much combat effectiveness. This situation seems to have reached a stalemate. I just said you lost, Zifa, my injury can be recovered, how about you? Orgrim feels that he can't fight at this time, so let's talk. Zifa covered his broken arm with one hand, looked at Orgrim with hatred in his eyes, and did not speak. He was waiting for him to do this. His arm adapted to the severe pain, and when he could endure the severe pain, he launched another attack on Orgrim. "Why don't you speak? Are you afraid of me?" Orgrim stood up while holding his war hammer, talking rubbish to Zifa and mocking him. But as soon as he finished speaking, his expression changed, and he looked at the sea in the distance with a gloomy look. At this time, there were 7 or 8 navy warships on the sea, approaching quickly. There was no doubt that the second batch of navy support had arrived. Orgrim turned his head and looked to the other side. Sure enough, in the direction of Judiciary Island, there are also several huge ships heading here. Although the CP agency is much slower than the Navy headquarters, they still come to support after all. Zifa couldn't help but laugh after seeing Orgrim's gloomy expression. He stood up, but as soon as he pulled the corner of his mouth, he suppressed it again because of the severe pain in his arm. "Ah, humph, Orgrim, who do you think lost? Don't forget, this is Impelton," Zifa sneered. Then, he endured the pain in his arm, straightened up, and once again condensed his arm domineering energy with his other hand. He said coldly, "Even if I lose one of my hands here, as long as I can take down your warhammer sea thieves, everything is worth it. The Marshal is here, you can't run away." "Admiral?" Orgrim said with a sinking heart. Marine Marshal Cyborg Kong. Although it has been rare to see him take action over the years, there is no doubt that he is a top master. At the beginning, in the New World, the Navy had not yet been attacked. When the thief occupied the home court, he fought with Beloric Redfield, the famous Red Earl, until both sides were exhausted. Redfield claimed to be able to fight with Whitebeard, Golden Lion, and Lugo with his own strength. A big pirate with 3 heroes standing side by side. His personal fighting ability is very strong, and his hearing ability is even strong enough to listen to people's hearts. In this battle, in the end, it seemed that Cyborg, the Marshal, lost, but in fact, the two sides were tied. No one had the power to succeed. Both sides suffered losses, and Redfield was also caught by the Skycarp. Taking advantage of his lack of physical strength, he was directly captured and imprisoned in Imperialton. Therefore, although Cyborg, the naval marshal, has not shown up for a long time and has never made a move, Orgrim does not dare to underestimate him. "Damn it, Beckman, you bastards, you are so busy trying to save someone, can you hurry up? I can't handle it anymore," Orgrim secretly cursed in his heart. As if responding to Orgrim's needs, he had just finished this idea. The collapsed ruins behind him began to shake at this time. Then, in Zephaniah, in the eyes of anger and unwillingness, all the boulders on the ruins floated. "Gee ha 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 ha, Orgrim, doesn't it seem that you are in good condition?" A familiar voice reached the ears of Orgrim and Zifa. Orgrim, who was still a little anxious, now had a smile on his lips, looked at Zifa and said, "Sure enough, you lost, Zifa." Zifa ignored Orgrim, his eyes were fixed behind Orgrim. Among the ruins, some figures walked out of the Imperial Gate that had just been covered up. The leader of them, wearing a black and white striped prison uniform, a golden lion velvet cloak, a half-burned cigar in his mouth, and 2 famous knives hanging from his waist. This figure is definitely Shiji. "Shiki," Zifa murmured with gloomy eyes. "Seriously, Boss Shiji, if you are a little slower, you will have to come to Impelton to save me next time." "The Admiral's support was almost arriving," Orgrim said quickly. Shiji looked at Zifa in surprise at this time. He never expected that Zifa's arm was broken at the elbow, and it was in a burning state. Just at this glance, Shiji already understood that Orgrim already had the strength to compete with the Admiral without any distinction. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 239. Listening to Orgrim's words, Shiji looked up at the sea again. Sure enough, the warship was approaching rapidly. Don't look at Shiji at this moment, he seems to be dragging himself like a millionaire. He is smoking a cigar, wearing a big cloak, and there are a group of menacing younger brothers standing next to him. But in fact, Shiji now knows very well that his condition is not good at all. During the time he was imprisoned in Impelton, the injuries he suffered during the battle with Garp and Sengoku in Marineford were not treated at all. Although they seem to have healed on their own now, they still remain. Got some hidden illnesses. Then, a long period of malnutrition caused his physical strength to drop a lot. Next, there is the power of haki. Because of the rudder on his head, Shiji knows very well that his haki power has dropped a lot. If his strength was 10 points in his heyday, now he can only maintain 5 points at most. It looks extremely powerful, but in essence, it is just paper. As for Beckman and others, they are doing pretty well and their condition has not declined much. But now there is a naval marshal on the opposite side, and there are 7 or 8 warships, and there must be some powerful lieutenant generals on them. Over at Judiciary Island, the experts from the CP agency who came so late must have gathered some powerful forces. Orgrim, that bastard, was seriously injured. Even if they were to fight, they might not be able to care about him. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, Shiji wanted to take revenge here, but in the end he endured it. Evacuate! Shiji shouted. Then, he stepped on his foot, and an inexplicable energy wave spread out. Impelton was shrouded in his Piao fruit ability. Due to physical problems, Shiji didn't waste any more energy. After his ability covered a layer on the sea surface, it didn't penetrate downwards. At the same time as he made this action, Zifa's expression changed, and he turned around and ran back. Sure enough, as soon as he made a move, the ground under his feet changed drastically, and a ferocious lion rushed out. Zifa did not hesitate at all, and jumped directly into the sea. At this time, Zifa also didn't dare to be too serious with Shiji. He didn't know what Shiji's condition was, but he knew very well that his condition was very poor. And Shiji, this guy, also took the lead and took action directly. He looked like he was extremely strong. In fact, it was a fight against a wolf with a stick, and both ends were empty. Fortunately, this wave of momentum at least frightened Zifa. Zifa also believed that even if Shiji could not fight, Beckman and others around him could. It is not something to be underestimated. In his condition, if he went up to fight, it would most likely be in vain, and he would even become a hindrance to the navy, with a high possibility of being captured. Therefore, Zifa preferred to retreat rather than go up. Carry out justice. At the same time, the black narwhal also broke out from under the sea. Shiji and others rushed onto the ship without hesitation. Beckman stretched out his hand to carry Orgrim on his shoulders. But after trying it, he was a little embarrassed. With his normal body, he could carry a person over 3 meters tall and drag him on the ground. Fortunately, Neiman was very fast and carried his eldest brother on his shoulders. Without any pressure on his huge body, he climbed directly onto the ship. Then, without saying a word, Shiji activated the power of the Piao fruit, shrouded the black narwhal, and lifted directly into the sky. The huge battleship rushed in. Before the second wave of support from the navy arrived, they left this land of right and wrong. But behind Impelton, this guy Mihawk was holding the black knight in his hand, with 2 wounds hanging on his chest. He tilted his head and looked at the black narwhal rising into the sky with some confusion. Not far away from him, Shiryu had a huge knife in his chest. He could even see his internal organs. At this time, this unlucky guy passed out in the ruins, as if defeated by Mihawk. Mihawk frowned and looked at the black narwhal that gradually disappeared from sight, and then he whispered softly, "What's going on? I haven't boarded the ship yet." After thinking for a while, my hawk looked at several small sampans parked on the coast not far away. That was the small boat used by Impelton's blue ape jailer Beast when he occasionally went out to sea for fishing. On the other side, on the black narwhal, Orgrim sat slumped in front of the mast, with blood dripping from the corner of his mouth, and boasted, "Did you see it? Did you see it? Magellan, Porisalino, ze damn it! I killed all three of them by myself." After hearing Orgrim's bragging, Beckman couldn't help but want to make trouble, but after thinking about it carefully, he couldn't say anything to make trouble. There is no other reason, because Orgrim's performance this time is indeed too outstanding. Magellan, the deputy director of Imperial Prison, is a user with natural devil fruit abilities. There are rumors in the world that there is not much difference between him and the monster rookies in the Navy. From this, it can be seen that his strength should not be weak. Porisalino, a natural type shining fruit possessor, is one of the flag bearers of the Navy headquarters. If nothing else, many people believe that Porisalino will definitely become an admiral in the future. Zifa, not to mention, he is now an admiral. It was these three powerful figures who all fell into the hands of Orgrim in the Battle of Imperial. This shows how powerful Orgrim is. Without looking at other messy factors, just looking at this record, I'm afraid it can be said that Orgrim's record has crushed 99% of the pirates on the sea. Even Kaido and Big Mom probably haven't beaten it. Such an outstanding record, right? As for the twists and turns in this, for example, Magellan's ability was directly restrained. For example, Porisalino and Zifa both fell into the rhythm of Orgrim's battle. For example, they did not know what Orgrim's trump card was. Does this make sense? On the sea, many people only look at the results and not the reasons. After Orgrim played for a while, no one seemed to pay attention to him. Neiman and others gathered around Shiji and asked questions. It made him a little bit embarrassed. Smacking his lips, Orgrim said dissatisfiedly, "I almost risked my life to save Boss Shiji, but no one cares about my serious injury." After muttering a few words, Orgrim suddenly he was stunned for a moment, turned around to look for it, and then screamed, "Fuck." His voice startled Shiji and others. Beckman asked angrily, "Why are you so surprised? My hawk? What about my hawk? Didn't that guy get on the boat?" Orgrim asked hurriedly. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone except Shiji was confused. Shiji had never seen my hawk from the beginning to the end, so he only regarded my hawk as "I didn't come this time." After all, no matter what the operation is, it's normal for someone in the family to be at the base camp. But the others know very well that my hawk came with them this time. It seems that from the beginning, he was just like Impy. The warden of Dunton got into a fight, but he didn't pay attention to where the fight went. In addition, for a long time recently, my hawk has been a bit transparent. Everyone was walking in a hurry just now, and it seemed that forgot about him. It's over, that guy must have been caught, right? Orgrim couldn't help but worry. After a lot of troubles, Neiman finally contacted the resentful Mihawk through the phone bug, and finally met Mihawk, the forgotten man, before the whirlpool current. The operator reconnected and allowed him to board the ship. Afterwards, the group of people officially left Impelton amid Mihawk's cursing complaints. At the same time, in Impelton, Navy Marshal Cyborg Kong was directing a group of navies to carry out rescue operations. After a while, several navies rescued Zifa, the admiral, from the sea. At this time, Zifa was not unconscious, but because of the sea water, the injury worsened. Seeing that Zifa was missing half of his arm, Marshal Cyborg, who originally wanted to blame something, did not say those words in the end. Instead, his eyes were slightly red and he comforted Zifa, an old comrade. This guy Porushalino was lifted out of the ruins. He had a broken arm and a broken leg. Fortunately, unlike Zifa, Zifa had his ashes thrown away directly. Porushalino's bones were only broken, and with the Navy's medical technology, they could still be cured. But at this time, Porosalino was already unconscious, and his injuries were not limited to these, such as ribs, broken bones, damaged internal organs, etc., at least go to a sanatorium to recuperate for a month or two. As the excavation work of the ruins continues unfolding, at dawn, the Navy's rescue team finally dug out Magellan, who was only half-breathed, from the ruins. Magellan was also miserable. After being restrained by the high temperature of Orgrim's warhammer, 70% of his body turned into a dry clod at the last moment. Then, the clod was smashed by the ruins. One can imagine the consequences. What? If you don't count his disability, his injuries were more serious than those of Sci-fi and Porosalino combined. What? You said you didn't fight Shiji. Marshal Cyborg was sitting on the warship with some surprise. He looked at Sci-fi, who was covered in bandages, and asked. That's right, Sci-fi nodded helplessly and said. You mean, your arm, Magellan, Porosalino, all three of you were killed by that Husgarot Orgrim, like this? Marshal Cyborg asked in a deep voice. Ashamed to say, there are indeed many reasons and major mistakes, but as far as the results are concerned, it is indeed the case. Sci-fi nodded with some shame and said. That rascal, have you grown to this point? Marshal Cyborg frowned and murmured softly. General Sci-fi wanted to say something. For example, that Orgrim may not be as strong as you think. The reason why we were defeated so miserably was because of many major factors. Erroneous. But in the end, he still did not open his mouth to explain anything. Sci-fi believed that the Navy should indeed be more vigilant towards Orgrim. Besides, what's the use of saying this? After all, just as Orgrim said, Sci-fi lost. On this sea, all you see is the result. No matter how many reasons there are, the fact is that Orgrim single-handedly defeated him, the Admiral, along with Porosalino and Magellan. It seems that that bastard has finally grown to the point where we are worried. After returning, we will increase his response level. It is planned in the plan to take targeted actions against Khazgaros Orgrim in the future. Two generals must agree and participate at the same time. Marshal Cyborg said in a deep voice. Sci-fi nodded and had no objection. Your hands, Marshal Cyborg looked at Sci-fi with some regret. It's nothing, it's just a broken arm. I intend to retire anyway, Sci-fi forced a smile and said. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 240. New World, Melview. Orgrim had already fully recovered by this time, and he walked out of his courtyard early in the morning. When I arrived at the gate of the yard, I saw Mihawk, who was grabbing Doflamingo and seemed to be chatting about something. I really have no intention of learning swordsmanship. In this way, if there are any good products, famous swords, etc. in the dark world in the future, I will help you pay attention to them. Okay, Doflamingo smiled and shook his head at Mihawk. Mihawk didn't dwell on anything, nodded and said, then please. No, it's nothing. We can still be considered partners now, Doflamingo said very casually. Orgrim followed and walked over. Before he could speak, Mihawk frowned slightly, glanced at him with some displeasure, and then turned around and left. What is he doing? What does it mean? Orgrim walked to Doflamingo angrily and asked. You're probably still angry, right? Doflamingo said with a smile. You're stingy, didn't you accidentally forget him in Imperialton? Orgrim felt a little embarrassed as he spoke. After all, if Mihawk hadn't been lucky, he might have been killed in Imperial. Mihawk didn't slash him with a knife, and he was already in a good temper. What did he tell you? Orgrim turned around and asked. Doflamingo waved his hand and then said, nothing. Maybe he thinks I'm very similar to him, just chat casually. Resemblance. You too, Orgrim looked at Doflamingo in surprise, with a very puzzled expression. This my hawk is working towards the number 1 swordsman, while your Doflamingo has a dark heart and is working towards the dark world is working hard. What do you two have in common? Doflamingo looked at Orgrim with a resentful expression and said, after all, we in Imperial are all transparent people. It's a good thing that he took Caesar and ran to the ship, otherwise bastards like Orgrim might have forgotten him in Imperialton too. Speaking of which, Doflamingo can be regarded as a powerful guy, but in Imperial, he was almost always on the sidelines. He stayed in the corner with Caesar and watched Orgrim show off his power. Gee ha 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 ha, what I said is, am I not worried about your safety? Orgrim laughed awkwardly, and reached out to pat Doflamingo on the shoulder as if nothing had happened. Doflamingo didn't care too much about Orgrim. On the contrary, he preferred Imperialon's soy sauce character. At least it was safe. He didn't think he could compete with a naval admiral. He didn't even think he could handle Magellan. Well, thank you very much, Master Zui, for taking care of me. Doflamingo followed Orgrim's words and smiled. Well, who calls us partners? Orgrim patted Doflamingo on the shoulder. After a slight pause, he asked, how is it, was the news published in the newspaper? Not yet. Doflamingo shook his head and said. Orgrim smacked his lips when he heard this, and said with some dissatisfaction, could it be that the Navy wants to cover the lid? What a bunch of nagging guys. It's been over half a month and there's still no news. They didn't even think about it. Could they keep the news under wraps? When Boss Shiji shows up, everyone should know that something happened to Imperial. Doflamingo did not answer this question, but pretended to be nonchalant and asked Master Hammer, let me say something that shouldn't be said. Now that the big man Shiji has come out again, your Warhammer pirates and Fekanhai the thieves group, how to calculate this, who can call the shots? How? Are you worried that something will happen to our partnership? Orgrim smiled and asked. Doflamingo also smiled, then nodded very naturally and said, Master Hammer, I am different from you. I have staked all my wealth on this. It's on you, I'm still a little worried. Gee ha 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 ha, you guys are becoming more and more direct in your speech. Orgrim laughed and joked. Doflamingo said, there is no need to make the relationship between us so hypocritical, right? What you said makes sense, but don't worry, you have handed over Caesar to me. Of course I will not burn bridges. How should we cooperate? How should we cooperate? As for Boss Shiji, I am also preparing to meet him. As for him, talk to him about these things. Will you go with me? Orgrim thought for a while and said softly. Doflamingo was stunned for a moment, and then asked, shall I go with you? Does it fit? What's inappropriate? By the way, I would like to introduce you to him, so that the flood will not wash away the Dragon King Temple and the whole family will not know each other. As soon as Orgrim finished speaking, he pulled Doflamingo and walked towards Shishi's hall. Melville was much quieter than before, because the Navy had not yet cleared Imperials. The news was released, so not many people knew about Shiji's return. Those cotters who had left Shiji's banner would naturally not show up. He dragged Doflamingo all the way to Shiji's hall. Before he entered, Orgrim heard nightingales roar. Admiral, you can't eat like this so early in the morning. It's very detrimental to your physical recovery. Didn't I tell you this several times? You need to give up drinking, for at least 3 months. You should not drink alcohol, and it is best not to smoke. You should also eat lighter meals, eating smaller meals more frequently. Damn it, who the hell roasted the whole lamb? How can anyone eat roasted whole lamb so early in the morning? Nightingale patted Shiji's dining table and roared. Shiji was holding a roast leg of lamb in his hand. His mouth was full of oil as he ate it, with a look of satisfaction on his face. At the same time, there was also a bottle of good wine on hand. Orgrim looked helpless when he looked at him, as if he was starving to death. It could be seen that this guy Shiji had really eaten in Imperialton. It's been a lot of hard work. It's been months since I've had any meat, right? I don't know if it's because I got better after entering Impelton this time, or if it's because I was moved by Orgrim and the others. Anyway, Shiji's character seems to be much better now. He is not as withdrawn and gloomy as before, nor is he so arrogant, well, at least to my own people. In the past, how could Nightingale dare to slap the table, yell, and lecture Shiji while he was eating? But now, he dared, and although Shiji's expression was very impatient, he accepted it honestly. I said, Dr. Nightingale, how can we, as pirates, eat without drinking? How can you have a light meal? How can I not eat meat? I, Shiki, am in Impelton and have been eating meat for several months. Just let me enjoy it first, Shiji said helplessly. I am doing this for your health, do you understand? Do you still want to recover? Nightingale said angrily. While biting the leg of lamb, Shiji's expression turned slightly gloomy. Then he smiled bitterly and said, you don't know about my situation. Is it possible to recover? After Nightingale heard Shiji's words, he was stunned for a moment, and then fell silent. Dr. Indigo and Nightingale gave Shiji a comprehensive examination after he came back. Indigo Dge is a master of biomedicine and technology, and Nightingale is a world-class doctor. After examining Shiji, both of them came to the same conclusion. That is Shiji's physical fitness. He has dropped a lot, and there are some hidden injuries in his body, especially the injuries left in Marineford. Due to the deterioration of more than half a year, they are no longer irreversible. Coupled with the rudder on his head, his domineering power continues to increase. Even if you exercise diligently every day, you may not be able to make up for the loss. Generally speaking, Shiji's state is currently impossible to cure and they cannot restore him to full health. Medicine is constantly improving, and now, there are some difficulties now, but that doesn't mean they can't be solved in the future. The most important thing is, Boss Shiji, you can't give up treatment. If even you give up, that's really hard to cure, Nightingale finally said with some shame. After all, as a ship's doctor, he could not cure his own patients. Nightingale was somewhat sad, especially since his relationship with Shiji was not bad. Gee ha 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 ha, what can be done? However, I will not give up treatment, but if there is not much hope now, it will make me degenerate to some extent. Apart from eating meat and drinking, everything else is up to you, okay? Shishi quickly swept away his frustration and said to Nightingale with a smile. At the same time, Orgrim also dragged Doflamingo in, looked at Shishi and laughed. Okay, Nightingale, it's not easy for Boss Shiji to get out of that damn hell. Just let him live in peace for 2 days. As soon as Shiki saw Orgrim, his expression became very pleased. It can be said that Shiji is so satisfied with Orgrim now. Not to mention that this bastard is getting stronger and stronger, he is really affectionate and righteous. For ordinary people, even if their biological father is imprisoned in Imperial, they may not dare to rescue him. But Orgrim really came to save him. Shiji sometimes thinks that perhaps making Orgrim his only disciple and heir was the most correct choice he made in his life, right? Just from this friendship, Shiji felt that all his efforts in cultivating Orgrim over the years had not been in vain. Orgrim, you are here, Shiji said with a smile. Well, I have fully recovered, but you, Boss Shiji, tisk, in short, although you can indulge a little bit, don't give up on treatment. Orgrim laughed and said. Shiji smiled and scolded Orgrim, and then said with some emotion, sometimes, I really envy your physique. If I am like you, then I won't be in the same predicament now. I'll remove this damn thing on my head in one go. Although Shiski pretended to be indifferent, Orgrim could still feel his regret. After all, it would be strange for a current hero to have reached this point without regrets, especially for someone like Shiji who has such deep feelings in his heart. For those with great ambitions. Is there really no way, Orgrim looked at Nightingale and asked in a low voice. Nightingale shook his head, and then said softly, there are two ideas now. The first one is that maybe in the future, with the advancement of medical treatment, there will be some powerful treatment plan. You can make some arrangements with Boss Shiji. What about the second one? Orgrim asked. The first one is that the uncertainty is too great. Who knows when this medical progress will be made? What if it is made in 100 years? Then all the Shiki will turn into ashes. Yes. The second one is devil fruit, healing, but this ability is very rare. I have been looking for it over the years, and the general healing system is useless. The best thing is that it is the legendary surgical fruit, Nightingale spoke. As soon as he finished speaking, Doflamingo's eyes lit up as he followed Orgrim. He knew the fruit of the surgery. It was a devil fruit that could bring people eternal life. However, Doflamingo didn't intend to say anything. It is estimated that few people in the sea know this kind of secret. Even Shiji, the golden lion, probably doesn't know it, right? If he hadn't seen some confidential documents in Marijoya when he was a child, Doflamingo wouldn't have known that there could be the power to make people immortal in this world. Alas, my celestial dragon bloodline is indeed somewhat noble. Doflamingo is not going to tell Orgrim about this matter. After all, this person has selfish motives. While Doflamingo was thinking about this, Orgrim said carelessly, oh, just that thing. According to legend, if developed to the extreme, this ability can make people immortal. As soon as he finished speaking, Shiji was confused, Nightingale was also confused, and Doflamingo even looked like he had seen a ghost. Damn it, you just said such a big thing casually. Big guys, don't keep your monthly flower passes, just give them to me, I'm thick-skinned and like these tacky things.